This is a very emotional story. So I want to start with just what was your inspiration to create this? Like, what was the drive to tell this specific story? And I'm going to follow it up with why did you tell it the way that you did? But I want to start with just why this story?
Yeah, I appreciate you asking that. I've always been a big horror fan. We were talking a little before the recording started about some of the DVDs I grew up on. And since the time I was 5 years old, I've been obsessed with the horror genre. I've always found it to be the most effective way to tell personal stories in a way that people actually give a shit about. The format of horror itself allows you, I think, to be a little bit more visually inventive than, say, a drama or a comedy or certain other genres would. And I think the same could be said for sound design. You can be way more inventive and creative with the soundscape as a filmmaker. Now, as for why did I tell this story, I personally, I was ill in my adolescence. I had a hormone disorder. Now, the story of The Rotting of Casey Culpepper is about a girl who is combating leukemia. She has cancer of the blood, and she is undergoing chemotherapy treatment. And as she's undergoing this treatment, she starts to experience visions of a tumor-covered monster that in the lore of my movie universe, we refer to as the Tumor Man.
Sure.
And now I wanted to take my experience with adolescent illness, that hormone experience that I was telling you about, and tell a story that tapped into the fear, the isolation, and the loneliness of that illness. And in as respectful a way as possible, tell that story that tapped into those emotions in a more relatable and frankly higher stakes way. And that's why I chose to tell a story that was about a girl with cancer. Now, Nathan, you and I offline also talked about, other various personal connections to cancer. So I wanted to approach it with as respectful a lens as possible. And I also really wanted this movie to have a drama sensibility about it. It is important to me that even when dealing in genre, that the movie sort of feels like a drama or gets you to care about the characters for the first half before later introducing the supernatural, which is something I sort of learned from reading a lot of King over the years. You get halfway through the novel before there's any introduction of the supernatural.
Yeah, you got to care about the people to care what happens to them. If you jump straight into here's all of this horrific stuff, it's like, well, that's horrific. But if you don't care, then it's just, all right, it's horrific, but I don't care. So yeah, building those characters, which, let me just take a quick sidestep. In a short, that's really difficult because a lot of short directors either want to give too much backstory and they end up giving you like a 45-minute short because there's so much that they're trying to get into the characters. Yeah. Or they jump too far ahead and it's like, okay, let's just get straight to it and jump straight into the horror. So finding that balance to get you to care quickly and then get to the horrific elements so that you still care about what's happening. That's a really difficult balance. And I think that you did a great job with it. This was, again, one that really stuck with me when I was watching, or it really hit me when I was watching it, and it stuck with me since then. So kudos on finding that balance.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I think that if you check out the internet landscape of YouTube horror movies, it sort of fits into two factions. There's the movies that have no character at all, and they're just sort of jump scare based, and they prove that you can pull off the mechanics of a jump scare. And then there's people that go completely in the other direction. And, like you said, sometimes we don't really have time for that. So finding something that had a bit of propulsion and made you care about the characters, but also fulfilled some of the genre expectations was it was a bit of a tightrope, so I'm glad it seems to be working.
Yeah. Yeah, and like you said, we had talked a little bit in our correspondence about some of that personal history, and why it hit me so hard is I've had people in my life that have had cancer, like very close. My sister had cancer when she was very, very young. She's my older sister, so I never actually experienced it when she was in the hospital, but it's something that affected and continues to affect like her entire life. and my dad had cancer, and like there's been a lot of illness in people that I've been very, very close to. And so this movie really, really hit me hard because it didn't feel like you were exploiting it. It didn't feel like, all right, I want to tell a horror story, or I don't know, leukemia? Sure, why not? Let's just use that. It felt like there was an understanding of how scary and horrific and just terrifying an illness can be, and how it can very easily consume you without it being the entirety of your being. And one of the things that I loved so much about this short was that, along with actually caring about the characters, when the tumor man started to show up, when that supernatural stuff started to show up, it was showing up in a way that was enveloping everything. It's not like, here's the real world, and then here's this monster that is just invading into the world. The monster was completely reshaping the way that the little girl experienced the world. So when the tumor man was there, it was a completely different landscape. It was completely foreign to her because, a little kid going through something like this, they're not going to know how to navigate it and just be like, oh, that's just the disease. Everything else is fine. This shapes everything that I know. And the way that you shifted that landscape and the way that you kind of brought in all these supernatural elements, it made it feel so isolating, and it made it feel so daunting and so horrifying. But I also love that you gave it a lot of hope. Like, this wasn't obviously the little girl's going to beat this. Like, it wasn't clear what was going to happen from the outset. And so finding that balance between showing how just fucking terrifying going through an illness like this can be, not just for the kid, but for the family as well. But then also giving some of that hope and giving some of the, it's gonna be a real fight, but maybe we can beat it. Even if we don't beat it, we have to try. Like, we can't just give up. We can't. And again, it felt like such a personal story when I was watching it, in part because of my own connections, but also it was clear to me that you were approaching this story and not just using it as a gimmick to put some cool effects on screen. So thank you very much for approaching it with that respect.
No, thanks for saying everything you just said. In terms of the environment altering, midway through the movie, what happens is, as Casey's condition worsens and the monster grows stronger, the environment itself starts to sort of spread with this demonic decay that also has a natural overgrowth to it, which to me is sort of subtly, insinuating that, or I'm trying to allude to, there's this life and death, circle and life thing going on, like life and death are intertwined. And that's why, as this death imagery becomes more ubiquitous in the home, it's intertwined with life, trees, branches, wood that is perforating through the walls and things. I wanted to tell a story that was subjective as possible to Casey. So as she's getting more and more sick and becoming more and more afraid and questioning whether she's going to be able to stand up to this monster, the environment itself and the soundscape is shifting with her subjective perception of the world. It did come from a personal place, because back at the time when I was going through my hormone experience, I was sticking 2 needles in my body a day. It was incredibly isolating. The doctors couldn't tell me whether or not I was ever going to have a normal life or be fully healthy again. Mm-hmm. And it was a really dark time in my life, and friends fell by the wayside. I felt like even family members didn't understand what I was going through. It was profoundly lonely, profoundly terrifying. Even the experts couldn't say whether or not I was going to turn a corner. And that is what I wanted to tap into. And and not only the fear of that, but the isolation. Yeah. And that's why I wanted to isolate Casey as much as possible.
Yeah. And again, that definitely came through. Like, again, it wasn't just scary because of the monster. Yeah. It was scary because as her world shifted, it did feel so isolating. I'm really glad that you did use a lot of that natural elements and that you brought in some of those trees and life, because, anyone who has ever dealt with cancer or had someone who has had cancer, one of the treatments is chemotherapy, which it kills cancer, but it kills everything else in the process. So like for some people, I recognize there's other treatments for it, but for for the people who choose to go through chemo, the way that they are trying to defeat this monster is also destroying other parts of them. And so, I don't know if that was necessarily intentional, like that very specifically.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, like when I was watching it, it was like, this growth is it was almost like the environment was the treatment. And like that was the cancer growing, and the chemo had to be killing that off, destroying some of her environment. But in that destruction, that was making room for some of that new growth and new life.
Definitely. And one of the things I'm most proud of in the movie is that, and it's all just told through visuals and a ballet of blocking and editing, but Casey and the monster sort of doesn't come out until the end of the movie, but they share a physical link between them. And so what hurts the monster also turns out to hurt Casey as well. And so for her to defeat the monster, she has to push through an immense amount of pain to come out stronger on the other side. So in that, it's not really just a movie that is an allegory for cancer, but more so, it's really a movie about the process of chemotherapy. When the monster burns, Casey's skin is burning as well. So it is a metaphor for putting poison in your body, having to endure that pain, having to find the courage and the bravery to subject yourself to that so that you can heal, not knowing if you're going to be able to have the strength to push through. And it's all told through visuals and, again, blocking and the editing between the monster and Casey. It's pure cinema, not to sound like a pretentious asshole, but that's why I feel like the people who get it are really actually digging it like a lot. And then I think that there's this other faction of people that kind of just like don't know what the hell's going on at the end. And I'm kind of okay with that. Like that I made a movie that is a little bit polarizing, because the people who seem to get it and they dig it. And I'm really proud of that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's the classic adage about movies of show, don't tell. Like when all of this is happening, during all of the scenes where the world is starting to change and, fighting the monster and it's how it's affecting her. If like the dad was there explaining to her, now you have to go through this treatment. I know it's going to hurt you, but it's going to be better for you in the long run. Like if he had been there explaining it,
yeah, man,
it wouldn't have had the same impact. Now, how old was the character? Not necessarily the actress, but how old was the character supposed to be?
Yeah, that's a good question. The character was supposed to be 9, and the actor at the time was 11.
Okay. So, 9 years old, that's definitely old enough to understand things, but also not old enough to understand things at all. So it would have been very natural to have the dad saying, look, I know that this hurts. I know this sucks, but this is why we still have to go through it. That would have been a normal conversation to have. But in the language of cinema, that would have slowed things down so much. And so I'm glad that you understood that and approached it that way of, I don't need him to tell her it's going to hurt. Just show that it hurts. I don't need the explanation.
Yeah, it should be experiential. Yeah. Sometimes it's okay to just kind of give the impression of something. You don't need to dramatize everything, and break it down into it. That's what's beautiful about cinema. And, you'll notice in the short film, there's sections where the movie pauses and we go to what I call my expressionism shots, and it goes to hyper slow motion. And the set even changes a little bit. And it sort of pauses the movie. And it's like this subjective 5 seconds of showing what the moment feels like to Casey in a way that like a photographer would, but using hyper slow motion and, just fantastical lighting. And so I have a few of those moments in the feature version of the script. It's supposed to be ineffable. You're not supposed to be able to articulate it. It's better than words. It's what this a moment feels like to the character. And as a visual artist, I'm expressing that through this hyper slow motion shot for 5 seconds. If you were able to simplify it in a reductive way to like, this is what this shot means, then I'm failing, and like we don't need that shot. So I really appreciate that you like the visual aspect of the movie.